I'd like to conclude by talking about standard ways in which we can simplify expressions and statements involving booleans. It turns out that students that are new to Boolean expressions and conditional statements will often write complex expressions. They'll write expressions and statements that are more complex than they need to be. And I'd like to show you some simplifications that you should always use in your code. So let's see some examples. For instance, suppose that BE stands for Boolean expression. It's any expression that stands for true or false. Then it is never, never, never necessary to test if the Boolean expression is true by saying Boolean expression equals true. Because in all such cases, that's the same as just writing Boolean expression. Because if Boolean expression is true, then true equals true is true. And if it's false, false equals true is false. And so we could just write the same thing as writing Boolean expression. And similarly, it is never necessary to write Boolean expression and test it for false, because that's the same as saying not Boolean expression. For instance, if Boolean expression is true, true equals false is false. That's the same as not true. Here's another thing that never needs to be written. You never need to write if Boolean expression return true, otherwise return false. That is never, never necessary. Because in all such situations, that's the same as returning a Boolean expression. Because if, in fact, the Boolean expression is true, you're returning true. And if it's false, you're returning false. So you're just always returning the value of the Boolean expression. Similarly, if you have a Boolean expression, if you test a Boolean expression and return false, otherwise return true, that's exactly the same as returning the negation of the Boolean expression. Here's another example. Suppose you have a conditional statement in which we test if Boolean expression 1, and if that's true, we return Boolean expression 2, otherwise we return false. That's the same as having just calculated the conjunction of Boolean expression 1 and Boolean expression 2 and return that. So we never need to write that. Similarly, if I have a test for if Boolean expression 1, and in that case I return true, otherwise I return Boolean expression true, I don't need to write that, because that's the same as just calculating the disjunction of Boolean expression 1 and Boolean expression 2 and returning that. So I never need to write this. If I have a Boolean expression and I store it in a result variable and then I return the result, it's never necessary to do that, because I could always just return the Boolean expression. And finally, this is a little more complicated. If you have a Boolean expression that you're testing, and then you perform some statement, and afterwards you return true, and otherwise you perform the statement, and otherwise return false, why, you could have done the same thing by simply remembering the result of your Boolean expression in a result variable, always doing s no matter what, and then just returning result. So that's a simpler way to say the same thing. We'll conclude with an example that shows how we can use these simplifications to greatly simplify the body of a method. Suppose that we have a method that determines whether a location is equal to another location. It turns out this is the .equals method of the location class. So one way we could write that is we could test if our x position is equal to the other guy's x position, and our y position is the other guy's y position, we return true, otherwise return false, and if our x position was not equal to the other guy's x position, we return false. Well, notice that the statement in red here is an instance of something we saw on the previous slide. It's an instance of this simplification. So we know that in this case, we can just always replace that by the Boolean expression. So in fact, we can just say return this.y is the same as lock.y. And now let's take a look at what's in the green box here, which is we have if this.x is lock.x, I return this.y as lock.y, otherwise return false. Why, that's an instance of something we saw on the previous slide, which is this simplification. So that means that we can take this if statement and instead simplify it to just returning the result of these two Boolean comparisons. And this makes sense because we're saying compare my x to the other guy's x, compare my y to the other guy's y. If both of those are the same, I want to return true. And if either of those is false, I'm going to return false. So this is what's here in the bottom left corner is exactly what's up here in the bottom right corner is what's up here in the top left corner, except it's a much simpler way to say the same thing. So write what's down here in the bottom right rather than writing what's up here in the top left. And that concludes our discussion of conditionals and Booleans.